Hey everyone, welcome to Trapped in a World, the Howard the Duck podcast. This is our first episode. My name is Knol, and I'm here with my good friend Russell. How you doing, Russ?
I'm all right, Knol. How are you?
I've had a morning already, so it's a good time to podcast with some weird stuff. We're doing a podcast all about Howard the Duck, which nobody else is doing, I guess. So we had the idea. Russ had the idea of doing this kind of as a joke to start off with, and then, like all jokes, I end up taking them too seriously. So we thought, what the heck, man? Let's just do it. Let's do a podcast. Russell is, well, how do you know Howard?
Basically, Howard is just on my periphery. Like, I remember he had a Marvel Legends figure. He was obviously the 80s movie, and his appearances in Guardians of the Galaxy. So that's what I know him from.
The movie?
Yeah. I never saw the whole movie because I got about 20 minutes in and I was like, yeah, this isn't for me.
So what did you think when you saw him in Guardians of the Galaxy?
I was actually very happy to see him because I just thought it was a great, I guess like a gag. Because, you always expect the post-credit scene to be some kind of big revelation. And the fact that it was just Howard, I thought was great.
That's hilarious. You're just like, what? Oh, they did the talking duck.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fun Easter egg. Or duck egg.
Yeah, apparently that was meant to be more. Apparently they were going to do more with Howard, but some kind of stuff happened behind the scenes where they decided not to.
Yeah, we'll probably get into that stuff in later episodes once we start moving in. We're going to interject probably some of that stuff. We're here basically just to talk about the comic books.
Right.
And his appearances in those. And our formula is pretty much going to be, your average comic book podcast where we talk about an issue or two per episode. But we're going to go in chronological order. So it might take a while for us to get to covering his movie or covering some of the other stuff. But we'll probably slip some of the behind the scenes kind of stuff in between talking about his comic book appearances. And I figured we could cover about 2 issues per episode of Trapped in a World. And then, have plenty of time to make duck puns and all that stuff in between.
Yeah. We'll be going quackers.
We'll be going ducking crazy.
Bunch of ducking nerds.
Yep. And for anybody who's just decided to listen to a podcast about a random character they never heard of before, we should maybe give a little bit of a introduction to Howard. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to read, I copied and pasted some stuff from Wikipedia just for a general, like a general little knowledge of what the character is for people. So I will read that out. Howard the Duck is a fictional character appearing in American comic books published by Marvel Comics. The character was created by writer Steve Gerber and artist Val Mayerik. I think is how you pronounce it, Mayerik?
It sounds right.
Sorry, Val. I know he's still alive, so I could mispronounce Gerber's last name till the end of time, and he couldn't say anything about it. Howard the Duck first appeared in Adventure into Fear number 19, which we'll be covering today, in December of 73, which was about just before my time, to give a little bit of background on myself. And several subsequent series have chronicled the misadventures of the ill-tempered I can never say this word right, anthropomorphic animal trapped on a human-dominated Earth. Echoing this, the most common tagline of his comics reads, "Trapped in a world he never made." And that's where we get the title of our podcast. Mm-hmm. And it also doesn't really make much sense. Just like a lot of Howard's adventures. Howard's adventures are generally social satires, while a few are parodies of genre fiction with a metaphysical awareness of the medium. The book is existentialist and is the main joke, according to the creator Steve Gerber, is that there is no joke, that life's most serious moments and most incredibly dumb moments are often indistinguishable or distinguished only by the momentary point of view. Of course, Gloria Katz, who was the producer of the notorious ill-fated 1986 movie that you had seen, part only 20 minutes of, she had expressed that it's a film about a duck from outer space. It's not supposed to be an existential experience. So that's pretty funny.
Yeah. So what
she just didn't understand the whole point of the character in the first place.
Right. So from that description, Noel, this kind of sounds like Howard the Duck is the comic book equivalent of Seinfeld. It's a comic about nothing.
Yeah, except for a lot of things happen, but nothing that matters, just like Seinfeld.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a little background on Gerber is he'd been growing up he was a comics fan. He was a Marvel comics fan, and eventually we can get into like how he got hired by Marvel and stuff later. But he started writing for Marvel, doing a lot of like sort of the lower tier things and horror comics and things like that. And I don't know if he did Defenders or Howard first. Do you know?
I don't actually.
I think he did Howard before the Defenders, but right around that same time, he might have been doing Defenders first. He started, doing superhero comics in the normal way, but there was like a weird thing sort of in the zeitgeist of the time in comics. So like a lot of these people had come from not only being really into Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko's Marvel comics, but also being really into, a lot of the things that were banned because of the comics code, like the horror comics and things like that. And in the 70s, some of that comics code stuff started to kind of lighten up, and Marvel started deciding to do more horror comics, like the Man-Thing, Werewolf by Night, Dracula, and just all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
Like with or zombies, except for they couldn't call them zombies. What did they call them? Zombies?
Yeah. So something like that. I remember that from that Moon Knight comic.
Yeah.
They called them Zawambies or something like that.
Yeah. So there was like a lot of sort of influence from sort of the horror stuff. And then of course there was all like the underground comics that were big at the time. Things like, like Zap and like Robert Crumb comics, like Cheech the Wizard by Von Bode, and like, of course, like all the Mad magazine things were still big with Mad magazine was one of the biggest things at the time. And then even like Stan Lee's old assistant, Flo Steinberg, had started her own imprint called Big Apple Comics and got some of comics' biggest creators to do whatever they wanted, like almost like pornographic stories and horror stories and that. So it was just in the zeitgeist to do something different and weird. And I think Steve Gerber was a pretty young dude when he started. And so he was very much into trying to bring some of that to the quote unquote mainstream comics. Mm-hmm. And just some of the weirdness of the 70s into mainstream comics. And Howard ended up being one of the most popular comic book characters in the 70s, like up there with some of Marvel's top characters, like, Spider-Man, Hulk, etc. Mm-hmm. And then somehow later on, it just sort of faded from existence. And that's probably why a lot of people don't talk about Howard to this day. But it's really just weird to me that one of the biggest characters they ever had got kind of shoved into the background later on. And part of that has to do with a lot of the behind the scenes stuff with Steve Gerber and Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
Which we'll also discuss at a later date. We'll tease your little ears for that.
Yeah. I don't think the movie helped either.
No. I mean, part of that was because, was that Lucas? George Lucas produced it. And but then it really I think he just put the money behind it and it got taken over by other creatives that didn't understand it at all. Like they said, it's a duck from outer space, not a satirical character from another dimension used to make fun of comic books. So
Right.
he's a very comic booky character at its heart.
Right. Well, I feel like we can't talk about Howard without, you mentioned him already, Man-Thing. So I just kind of what's your thoughts on the Man-Thing, Noel?
I think the Man-Thing was a cool idea. Apparently created before Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people mix those two up because obviously they're both creatures from men that turned into creatures from the swamp, but Man-Thing is a very different kind of character. It's Swamp Thing can talk.
Yep.
And can think.
Yep.
And the Man-Thing is almost just a force of nature. It's like a weird, it's a much weirder character, and it doesn't surprise me that it didn't completely catch on.
Right.
Exactly. But yeah, it can only sort of feel emotions and doesn't, if they're good emotions, he's sort of curious about them. But if they're bad emotions, especially fear, he wants to destroy those emotions. Mm-hmm. So it's a really cool concept, but it doesn't always translate very well. He's really mostly a background character in most of his own comics.
Yeah, I noticed that reading the issues we talked about today.
Mm-hmm. That was it was sort of like supposed to be the, I don't know. I guess that is a bit of a horror trope, is like it's the creature in the background. Mm-hmm. It's not like you get a lot of, Jason Voorhees you do get some of his backstory eventually, but it's supposed to, it's just like, it's the scary thing. What do you know about Man-Thing?
Well, I know that whoever feels fear burns at the touch of the Man-Thing. I know he guards the nexus of realities, and he is kind of a derivative of a Golden Age character called the Heap. And right down to the little beak that they both have. Mm-hmm. And he had a really bad movie and a really bad miniseries written by R.L. Stine of Goosebumps fame.
Yeah, that was really unfortunate. I guess people were pretty excited about that when it was announced, and then, oof.
Yeah, it was not good at all. I got that as a Christmas present, and I wanted Santa to take it back.
That would probably burn Santa's hands if he had brought it back. The fear would have. Oh, well. Were you a fan? Before you got that trade or whatever, were you intrigued by maybe? Well, here's a better thing. How about one of his big character traits is that he is the guard of the nexus of all realities, which is a really weird Marvel concept. You want to describe to people like exactly what that means?
It's just, I don't know if I could describe it. We kind of get a little bit of it in the story that we're going to talk about, but yeah, he's kind of this guard. It is like so vastly different from Swamp Thing comics. Like we said, like the comparisons end with they're a big green monster in the swamp. That's like, there's nothing else similar between the two.
And they were both former dudes.
Yeah. Yeah, really, I never really read much Man-Thing. Like, he would pop up every now and then. I think I had some Marvel team-ups that he was in. I just know he's got a really cool design. And, that's my extent of knowledge. I'm much more familiar with his Distinguished Competitions counterpart.
Right, which is great.
Yeah.
But they are very different. But I would encourage people to check out Swamp Thing as well. But yeah, the nexus of all realities is like it's an intersecting point in the swamps of Florida for some reason. And it's probably, I'm not going to be able to claim to be an expert on any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. I like comics, but I'm not that big of a fucking nerd where I'm going to memorize every single fact about this stuff. I've been into comics since I was a little kid. I've read Howard the Duck comics before the movie. I own a lot of them, but not every single appearance of Howard the Duck. So I may get some of these facts wrong. So if there's any those big Marvel nerds who get real upset if we get something wrong, all we can say is we're sorry and eat me.
He's talking to you, Justin the Owl. That's who he's talking.
But the Nexus of All Realities is just a place where Marvel 616 universe, our main continuity, it's a gateway to all the other different multiverses and different realities. Why it's not in the Sanctum Sanctorum is beyond me. I guess it's because there's a swamp creature that needs to guard it all. But it's how, at least originally, Howard gets into our universe. So, which I guess leads us just to this first issue of the first appearance of Howard the Duck, where he's actually not even named in the first.
No, he's not.
He's just, I think he's even credited in the Marvel Wiki as Duck. Or unnamed Duck. But yeah, let's just get into talking about his first appearance here, which is in Adventure into Fear, Volume 1, Number 19, called The Enchanters Apprentice. I'll go through the credits, and then we're going to have Russell read out the synopsis of it, because to me, that's just going to be more funny. So it's released on September 11th, 1973. The cover date is December 73. And the artists for the cover were the fabulous Gil Kane and Ernie Chan. It was written, of course, by Steve Gerber, penciled by Val Mayerik. Man, I should really figure out if that's the correct word. Inker was Acel Trappini. Colorist was Stan Goldberg. Letterer Art Simic, and edited by the legend Roy Thomas.
Before I get into the synopsis, I do want to comment that cover is great. I don't know. I don't have my timeline quite in sync here. Was this? Were they publishing Conan comics at this time? Because this guy, this Korik guy that they introduced, seems like we don't have Conan, but here he is. But I feel like they were already publishing Conan at this time.
Yeah, I feel like this is 1973.
It seems like, I think like the biggest joke about this is it seems like they were building him up to be like this spin-off character, and then it ended up being Howard.
Yeah. Yep, this is after Conan, so they already had the Conan license.
Okay. Well, maybe this was Gerber's way to poke fun at Conan then.
Definitely. I mean, when we get later, I believe the first issue of Howard is called Howard the Barbarian. So.
All right. Well, I'll get into the synopsis here. As an improbable battle rages on below the castle, Man-Thing is picked up by Jennifer Kale, with the savage Korik following from behind. Korik catches up with Kale and the Man-Thing and attacks the two of them. Jennifer suddenly awakens screaming, and as her brother and grandfather burst into the room to reassure her it's all a dream. However, Joshua Kale has his doubts that his granddaughter's nightmares being just dreams. And I was immediately confused when all this happened.
Yeah, from panel 1,
yeah,
I was confused.
Yeah. His suspicions are validated when Korik is transported to Earth's dimension through a jar of peanut butter and resumes his attack on Jennifer.
And it's a 6-panel transformation, which is amazing.
And it's the weirdest looking peanut butter I've ever seen drawn, ever.
At first I was like, oh, it's Man-Thing turning from a jar of peanut butter into Man-Thing. It's like, nope, it's a jar of peanut butter that turns into a barbarian. It shows you right away Steve Gerber's sense of humor.
Yeah, that's one thing I notice is that this horror comic is not very horror. It's it's pretty on the nose. Anyway, however, when Joshua and Andy burst into the room, Korek believes himself surrounded and flees into the swamp. The Kales are soon visited by Dakim, the mystic.
Sure.
Who has come to tell the Kales about the disruption in the nexus of all realities caused by the construction being done in the swamp. He has also come to train Jennifer in his mystical knowledge. With her grandfather's permission, Jennifer leaves with Dakim. And I love the bit where she's like, every time he shows up, he leaves me when I need him the most.
Just like a man.
While in the swamp, Korek is confused with his surroundings and is about to give up his quest when he spots the man-thing spying on him. And I did really like that panel. We'll talk about that in a minute. Attacking the creature in a fury, he once again sees that no matter what he does, he cannot harm the man-thing. And so he stops fighting. Here we go. While lamenting over his plight, Korek is visited by Howard the Duck, who has also found himself transported to Earth's dimension as well. While in the other realm, Jennifer begins her mystical training by Dakim. However, an attack by their enemies leaves Jennifer alone when Dakim flees during their attack, and she is taken prisoner. While back on the Earth dimension, Howard and Korek team up to find a way back to their respective realities. Traveling through the swamp with Man-Thing in tow, Korek is compelled to go to the F.A. Schist construction site after after hearing a blood-curdling scream. Spotting demons attacking the site, the monsters soon turn their attention towards Man-Thing, Korek, and Howard and close in for the kill. This story is continued in Man-Thing number 1.
So, other than being utterly confused, actually, let's start with that. Let's start with the confusion. I read like I said, I hadn't read these first appearance comics, these Man-Thing comics before. And so I got into it. I was like, okay, I just must be missing something from the issue before this. And then I went back to issue of Adventure into Fear number 18. And there's other than Jennifer Kale, there's no rhyme or reason why we're just into this weird adventure straight up. And it's like, okay, why are there army men and barbarians fighting? Who is this?
Yeah, it's
chick in the bikini who looks a little like a pornographic version of Valkyrie.
Yeah, or what was Hulk's girlfriend that he had when he went to space? Jarella kind of looks like her. I as soon as I finished reading this, I messaged Knol and I was like, I just have one thing to say, and that's wow.
It could also have been WTF.
Yes.
Because what the fuck is going on with this comic book?
Yeah, the art is really good. Like I said, though, it's not very horror. It seems like the humor is there. He was definitely going for the humor because there's a lot of jokes in this.
Yeah, and if you've read his Defenders, it's like the same, which is, similar era. There's a lot of jokes in those issues, early Defenders issues that he did. He's a funny dude, and I think he's a really weird guy, and he wanted to be able to express himself. And this was a time in comics where they were just like, Roy Thomas was his editor. I'm sure it was quick, go for it. Mm-hmm. Do something weird, do a bunch of non sequiturs, have a barbarian come out of a jar of peanut butter. Why not?
So was Adventures into Fear, was that all Man-Thing, or was that like a rotating monster title?
I'm pretty sure it was a rotating title, because I think later Morbius, I think, took over the title for a while. Okay. And some of the issues, I think even some of the Man-Thing issues were actually almost more anthology, where they have multiple stories per
Yeah.
per issue. So yeah, but I think for this time, Man-Thing had been running for a while. Like there's probably earlier issues that do clue us. Jennifer Kale is in other stuff, and she's like a witch who decides that like Man-Thing is her buddy later on. She's really drawn into like his power and just what he's all about, his mystical stuff, and not like in sort of an evil way, but in just like a genuine, curious sort of way.
Right.
Yeah. What else did you think about this?
I like this. I mentioned this. I like this panel where Korek is kind of, sulking in the swamp. He doesn't know where to go. And you see like Man-Thing just kind of progressively getting closer. And it's almost like a comic book version of a jump scare. And one of the few bits of tension that I feel like this comic actually has. And then, I mean, how could I not talk about just Howard strolling on in? Ah, clam up, bud.
Yeah. I feel like he's got the Howard voice down. Like he had it in his head right away, because it's just like that's the kind of speech that Howard still has to this day, really.
Yep. We were talking about this off air, like, how does Howard sound? And I kind of said, you I think knocked it out of the park with your take, is that he's kind of like he's from Cleveland. And
he's got that Cleveland sort of, one of his catchphrases is wah, and I just picture that in the Cleveland accent, like wah. And cut the speech short and march, Korek,
And here I thought he sounded like Phil Parrish. No.
That would be a little, not much further east into the Pittsburgh area from Cleveland, so it wouldn't be too far off. Actually, Phil Parrish is how I'm going to read Howard. Phil Parrish from the great Capes and Lunatics podcast that you guys should all check out.
Yes.
Yeah, I found an interview with Gerber talking about, there's a lot of interviews with the guy, but there was one that I thought was, and he kind of tells the same story. Of course, every interview, they're like, how did you create Howard? And there's this one where he's talking about, he said, Howard's first appearance, of course, was in a 2-part story that appeared in Adventure into Fear and Man-Thing number 19 and Man-Thing number 1. When we apparently, that's a spoiler, I'm not going to skip ahead. But the character he wasn't meant long for this world, I guess.
Right.
And a couple of fans, people were like mad. Okay, I'll just say it. Like, we're going to talk about this issue. Anyway, Howard is killed off.
Yeah.
In a way we'll get into. But when that happened, a lot of people wrote in with letters and protested a lot. And he said a couple of fans from Canada even mailed a duck carcass to the office.
Oh, my God.
It had been their Christmas dinner or something, with a note attached that read, "Murderers." He said, apparently, at that point, it was apparent to me that I'd struck a nerve. There were other people at Marvel, including then editor Roy Thomas, who liked the character, but I think the only one who really believed Howard could carry on a book of his own was me. But they let him have it. So, and he said he was writing this issue when he was living in Brooklyn at the time, and that somebody had been playing some salsa music or something really loud outside, and he just kind of got into a trance and just started writing. And he wrote the thing about the peanut butter. And he was like, it was going pretty normal, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I just added in a duck walking out of the swamp for no reason. So he basically just said it was almost like an outer body experience or something. He was just like, screw it. Fuck it. I'm going to add a duck to this comic book.
I have to comment on how different Howard looks in his first appearance, too. I mean, just even to the next issue, he looks pretty different. He's got this red beak, this kind of orangish feathers on. The hat is yellow. Yeah, I have to assume that they went with the blue color scheme as a stab at Donald, which would get them in trouble later. But
it's sure. And the fact that he's not wearing pants yet is also another clue into what happens later.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, what are your thoughts on this this first
Yeah, it's
appearance?
fucking weird, man. I really didn't understand at all. What are these army men with the barbarians? It's a bizarre comic, but I really like Val's art. I think it's really cool. It's very House Marvel style for the time and for the next 10 or 15 or more years. It seems like everybody who wasn't Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko at this time was kind of
very similar.
Yeah, or John Romita, I guess. But a lot of those people were kind of melding all of those styles together. And I know that was like from on high passed down. It was basically draw like Jack Kirby or John Romita. You know, if you ever watch the or read the book, or they also did a little documentary about how to draw comics the Marvel way. They basically say, you either do it like this or we're not going to hire you. So everybody was just kind of doing that, I guess. But I think, yeah, it's fucking weird, man.
Yeah,
Howard. But like I said, I think he gets Howard's voice like almost immediately. He knew he was like whatever trance he was in. He got to know immediately what he wanted this duck to sound like.
It makes me happy that people were immediately enamored with Howard of all people. So much so that they would send their Christmas dinner into Marvel.
Yeah. I mean, it just shows, like I was kind of saying earlier before we started talking about this issue, it was sort of in the zeitgeist of the 70s, you know, like it's hard to, people forget sometimes that, you know, less than a decade earlier, Doctor Strange was one of the biggest characters in comics because a bunch of high-ass college kids thought it was cool and trippy, you know, and then when a lot of those same types of people who are reading, you know, it wasn't always nerds that were reading comics.
Right.
It was kind of almost everybody. And they were, by the time we get to the 70s, like a lot of the initial sort of popness of it wore off and it became very almost counterculture in a lot of ways. So, you know, even though it was weirdly mainstream, but also weirdly counterculture. And there was a lot of counterculture comics coming. And when they could buy something like this off the shelf at a drugstore or whatever, or the local market, I'm sure people were eating it up.
Oh, yeah. And just to comment on 60s Doctor Strange is, if you want to see Steve Ditko just going all fucking out on his art, just read some of that old Doctor Strange stuff because it's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And around the same time, he was starting to do the like Mr. A and some of his real out there and in my humble opinion, terrible comics.
Right, but
the art is killer.
That terrible comic has a tie to one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. So,
of course, the question.
Yes. Well, do we want to move on to Man Thing number 1?
Yeah. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty. This one is called Battle for the Palace of the Gods.
Love that.
So, yeah. Now this is Man Thing Volume 1, Number 1. So Man Thing has got his own title now. So it must have shifted. Adventure into Fear must have shifted over because this is basically just a month later. It's release date October 9th, 73, and the cover date is January 74. And the cover was by Frank Brunner and Glynis Wein, who is an amazing creator in her own right. Writer, of course, Steve Gerber. Penciler was Val Mayerik. Inker, Sal Trapani again. Colorist, Dave Hunt. Letterer, John Costanza. And edited again by, of course, or maybe not so edited by Roy Thomas.
I'm wondering, was Glynis Wein related to Lynn Wein, or is that?
I believe that's his wife.
Ah, I always love hearing about the comic couples that they had. You know,
oh, there were so many. I mean, a lot of the people that, you know, I guess, like even Flo Steinberg was sometimes, you know, doing paste ups or lettering or coloring. Like Marvel was really kind of a small operation, and sometimes very much a family operation.
You always hear about of course, Walt and Louise Simonson, and just some great power couples in comics. It's really neat.
It is.
Well, I guess I'll read this fucking synopsis. Story continued from Adventures into Fear number 19. At the F.A. Schiss construction camp.
Every time. What do you think FA stands for? Fucking A Schiss construction camp. It's gotta be.
Man-Thing, Korik, and Howard the Duck are confronted by demons that are followers of the Overmaster, who seek to take over all of existence. Fighting a losing battle against the nigh indestructible demons, the trio are saved by a last-minute intervention by Dakim, who asks them to join him in stopping the Overmaster. And this is when it gets real fucking weird.
Yeah, now we're getting weird, kids.
Meanwhile, Jennifer Kale is a prisoner of the Congress of Realities, who are waiting for the arrival of the Overmaster to execute her. When the Overmaster arrives, he orders his men to execute her. However, they fail to do so when a dimensional shift causes Daredevil and Black Widow to briefly appear in the room and disarm her executioners.
So the Congress of Realities, it's just a bunch of the first like half or 3/4 page splash of them.
Yeah.
There's like a swashbuckling pirate. There's a dude in like Air Force, like he'd been flying a jet.
A Native American.
A Native American. There's like a half man. There's a Viking in the background. There's a guy in looks like an old scuba suit. Looks like there's Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys have all been pulled for all these realities. And then when there's trumpets for the leader, the Overmaster who shows up, it's just a dude in a suit.
Yeah. Do we have any?
Bob Dobbs from the Church of the Subgenius shows up, and he is the Overmaster.
Oh, I was wondering.
And just when it couldn't get any weirder, for no fucking reason, the 70s power couple, Daredevil and Black Widow, come swinging in.
Oh man, when that happened, I lost my shit pretty much. I could not believe what I was seeing.
I just nodded my head. I was like, okay, that makes sense.
And yeah, I got a little chuckle out of the Overmaster being a guy in a suit. I'm wondering, do we have any context on that? Was that based off some Marvel Comics employee?
I don't know. I think it was more of just Steve Gerber's idea of like, what is the worst person to run a whole Congress of Realities? A businessman.
Yeah.
Which he's not wrong.
Right. Well, Jennifer is suddenly turned into water and leaks between the floorboards and rematerializes in between realms where Dakim and the others are waiting for her. Explaining that they need to realign the nexus of all realities, the foursome begin to hop across the dimensional path. However, Howard trips and falls into the dimensional void. Aww. In order not to lose any more of his companions, Dakim creates a helmet of protection for Korik. When the trio...
Turning him into a Kirby character.
Yes.
I shall now invest the power in you, Jack Kirby.
It's like, why didn't you do this for Howard earlier?
It's hard to make a duck head shaped helmet. That's why.
When the trio arrive at the center of the Nexus, they succeed in realigning it. However, it also gives the Overmaster and his Congress of Realities access to the realm of Theria.
Sure. I like when they get to the Nexus, how they know in it is there's just a giant red arrow pointing on which way to go. I guess we know this is the way to go because there's a giant 3D arrow pointing which way to go.
Yeah.
And then we get to a page that's completely sideways with a special note from Steve Gerber. It says, to our demon-proof readers, this page is supposed to be read sideways. Gang, or the Gerber curse strikes again. So apparently he's did something weird like this before, way before those sideways comics of the 90s.
Yeah. Congress of Reality's access to the realm of Theria, where they hope to kill the gods that reside there and take over. Traveling to Theria themselves, Dakim and the others stop the Overmaster's armies' progression to the palace of Theria. There, the Overmaster unmasks himself, revealing him to be the demon Thog.
He pulls off his regular dude face. And he's some random fucking demon.
Yeah, just looks like a stereotypical Satan.
Yeah.
The Man-Thing battles Thog and his minions, burning those who fear him. And when Thog becomes afraid of plunging into the moat of Therian water, Man-Thing grabs him and he begins to burn as well. With his hands melting, Thog tries to break free and ends up falling into the moat of pure water, which seemingly kills him. With their master defeated, the Congress and its armies retreat back from whence they came. After the battle, when the others wonder why the gods of Theria didn't help in the battle, Dakim shows that they never lived in the castle at all, but in the village below, and that the gods of this realm are two dogs under the care of two farmers. When the Man-Thing touches one of the dogs, they are shown the full of reality before all being sent to their respective homes. Wow.
Of course not, child. They were mere caretakers. These are the gods. It's just two dogs with their tongues out panting.
Yeah.
We're the dogs. We're the dogs. We're the gods. I mean, the gut. That is so funny. What
Squirrel.
a dumb play. Squirrel. That's how realities gets mixed up. A dog just sees a squirrel.
Yeah.
And of course, God spelled backwards is dog.
Yes. I think I'd be pretty all right if the gods were dogs. And wouldn't be hard to please them. Just, belly rub, a little bone here and there,
Yeah, a little treat. Take them for walkies.
Yep. I was kind of scared to death that when Man-Thing touched that dog's head, he was going to burn.
Are we finally going to see some horror in this comic?
Yeah.
No, we're just going to see the answer to everything.
This totally felt like they were setting up Korik to be like this new character. And was he even ever heard of from again? I don't know, but...
I don't know. I didn't do my homework. I'm not a good podcaster, so I didn't read it. I didn't look for his Marvel wiki.
I'm going to look it up right now.
But yeah, I'll say once again, this is a fucking weird comic. Steve Gerber really is maybe he's not one of the underrated geniuses. He's definitely known within comics to be a genius, but in maybe a lot of people don't know these days because he unfortunately left us over 10 years ago now. But he really was a weirdo and a forward thinker in comics, and I'm glad that someone gave him a job.
Yeah. Looks like Korik would appear in subsequent Man-Thing and Howard books. So we'll see him again on the show.
Anyway, so first of all, what did you think about this issue, and what did you think about Howard's introduction into comic books?
There's three main things I want to discuss about this issue. We've kind of already discussed the first one, but what the fuck with the Daredevil and Black Widow thing? I'm just kind of curious why specifically them. And I'm also wondering if that was referenced at all in Daredevil's book. I'm going to go with no. But
who knows? It might have been.
Two, let's just got to talk about the Overmaster. You know, the synopsis calls him Thog, but I don't think they call him that in the story. I think they call him the Nether Spawn or something like that.
Yeah, Thog may show up again too.
Yeah, he's
So they were writing that synopsis with some hindsight, maybe.
I did really like his kind of battle with Man-Thing. Get to see Man-Thing actually do stuff was cool. Burning people.
I mean, that's kind of spoiler. That's kind of the only thing he ever does.
Right. And then, you know, I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting Howard to just fall off a staircase into oblivion, but that's what happened. But it's perfect setup for when they would finally bring him back.
Well, it was just kind of genius. It's like, how are we going to put him in Marvel 616? He fell off the reality and he landed here with us.
Yep.
And so he even though he didn't know he was going to do it, it says he didn't know he was going to do it. It was a pretty genius setup.
Oh yeah. I liked these issues, even though they were weird as fuck. They were fun to read, and you know, I see why people were upset that Howard died, because he was definitely a highlight, especially when he just starts pulling out Glocks and starts shooting people. I didn't know if we were going to see any quack foo this early, or if that was coming later. But
no, that'll be later.
Well, I mean, Noel, what did you think about this issue and Howard's introduction?
I mean, I guess, yeah, had to get him into the comics somehow. So, and this, I just really like this. I mean, I wouldn't say this is good.
Yeah.
It's weird in that something doesn't have to be good for me to necessarily enjoy it. It just has to be either good or weird. And this is really weird. And, you know, like I said earlier, I like the idea of Man-Thing as a character. So it's cool to have that be in a comic that introduces Howard, but it was kind of one of the most bizarre ways to ever introduce a character that would become so huge, and then just throw him away.
Yeah.
Just almost a non sequitur, you know.
Yeah. But
yeah, Val's art again it's fun, and I don't know. There's some great I don't know if it's in this issue or the previous issue, but somebody says something about like crushing somebody like grapes, like blood grapes or something like that.
Yeah.
Some disgusting imagery. But it's cool. All the demons attacking Man-Thing. Whenever Man-Thing gets attacked, it's hilarious because it's just like, it's like it literally is just like hitting a piece of swamp. Like just nothing happens and you get the same reaction. It's just bleh, 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 gurgle, gurgle, bleh. Nothing happens. I don't know. Any final thoughts on these two issues? And
it's definitely got me intrigued about the future. I assume it only goes up from here. I was just kind of taken back by the fucking weirdness. I've read some weird fucking comics, Noel, and this might be up there with the weirdest that I've ever read.
Yeah, and these were in Marvel comic books. It's hard to think today we think of Marvel as such a omnipresent thing, but they were allowed to get pretty weird back then. And for the most part, Howard was allowed to be weird through almost every appearance he was ever in, even when it was kind of out of style. They're just like, it's Howard the Duck. He's got to be weird.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that wraps us up for this week. Next time, episode 2, we'll be covering Giant Size Man-Thing, Volume 1, Number 4, and Giant Size Man-Thing, Volume 1, Number 5. And these are actually shorter there were backup stories in the Man-Thing book because, those giant-size issues, there was a lot of pages to fill, and you couldn't have an entire issue of just Man-Thing. It would be maybe kind of boring.
Yeah.
So it's basically Howard's getting his own stories in those next issues.
Yeah, and just kind of glancing at the first page here, Howard looks way more like Howard now. So
as he will look for the next few years.
It's going to be a wild ride with you, Knol, and I'm looking forward to it because I'm going in blind.
Yeah, I'm glad you're joining me on this adventure into duxum, quackness.
What a quack!
Whatever. We'll get better with our puns as we go. But yeah, thanks for joining me, and thanks everybody for listening. And we will see you next time on Trapped in a World,
the Howard Duck Podcast.